Okay, today's experiment is going to be to try to resolve an ongoing cold start issue with the 280Z. This is a 280Z with a fuel injected fuel system, and the problem I've been having is every morning when I come out of the start, and the temperatures are not that cold here. I mean, we're talking about ambient temps in the 70s. Every morning I come out to start it, it's a lot of cranking, and eventually it'll start. Now, if I turn off immediately after it starts and try it again right away or 10 minutes later, it starts right up. So it's as if for some reason that first morning warm up, it just doesn't want to start. And I don't know if there's enough temperature, enough heat left in the system so it's not an issue. It's like not starting from dead cold. I'm not sure what's going on. And because I'm not sure what's going on, I've decided to try to isolate it to spark or fuel. Now, I've already done spark. I disconnected the plug. The plug's fire, hot, cold, doesn't matter. It's not a spark issue. Okay, so now we're down to fuel. Now, my theory is that it's being starved for fuel. The first thing I did was confirm that I'm getting good fuel pressure in the fuel rails. And I had some issues with some plugged lines and bad fuel tank. I think I've got all that worked out. I put a fuel pressure meter. The fuel pressure comes right up. Everything works like it's supposed to. I think I have a video showing that working now. So it's not that. And just to be on the safe side, this morning I even came in and moved this, opened this cover up, turned this valve, which actuates the fuel pump, and let the fuel pump run for a good 20 seconds to make sure everything was fully pressurized before I even cranked the engine up. So I knew it had pressure in the lines and all that. Still the same thing, hard to start. So, assuming it's a fuel issue, what I've done here is I've rigged up a bump switch. Let me show you what that is. It's this thing right here. Okay, I use that for cranking the engine over. And I've spliced it into the connections that goes to what they call the thermotime switch, which is a sensor it's in the water jacket, or at least in the thermostat housing. And what its function is when it's cold, when the water's cold, it completes a ground circuit that actuates this fuel injector right here. It's called a cold start injector. It just plugs right into the manifold, and the idea is when it's really cold, I think they said below 70s, something like that, or below 50s, I don't know, cold, okay, 50s, 60s, anything below that, it closes the contacts, and when you turn the start switch, when you're actually cranking the engine, there's power sent to this injector through that switch. That's all it does. It's not hooked up to the ECU unit. It's just a dumb connector that uses a simple thermally controlled switch to turn that injector on only during the cranking process. So if I pull that switch, if I hit that, then by bypassing it here, I've essentially just said, okay, I don't care what the switch is telling it. I'm going to tell it what to do. I still can't just pump raw fuel in anytime I want. This will only activate the way I have it hooked up during the starting cycle. So my plan is tomorrow morning, I know it works, I got fuel in this container where I shot some into it out of that. I actually pulled this injector out, put it into a can, made sure everything worked like it's supposed to. It was perfect. So tomorrow morning the plan is this. We come out, I'll give the engine a few cranks. If it doesn't crank up within a few seconds, which I know it won't because it never does, then I'm just going to tap that switch. And I don't mean a lot, because it pumps a lot of fuel out, and I don't want to flood the engine or do anything stupid. So I'm just going to pop it once. And I know that if the engine kicks right off, then I obviously have a lean run startup mixture, and that's the problem. Now, why would I have a startup issue? Well, according to the factory service manual, this engine has a multitude of sensors that tells it when to enrich. What it doesn't have is a feedback circuit telling it it's too rich. It just sends signals to the ECU, and the ECU outputs the pulse width to the injectors. So you pretty much have to have them set up right, otherwise, it's not going to self-compensate. In other words, if you start getting problems somewhere in the system, it's just going to keep doing it, just better or worse or whatever. So it's bad from that point of view, but it's also simple to work on. I mean, if the sensors are working like they're supposed to, theoretically, the thing should work. So what I'll do is if I still have an issue, The only system I can think, because the car runs fine once it gets started, I mean from off idle up to full power, I don't have any issues, which means I believe that the water temperature sending unit is sending the correct information to the ECU to set the fuel mixture. I believe the air temperature sending unit is correct. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're correct. I actually tested them already, but let's just say it's the ECU that's the problem. For some reason, the ECU, it seems to be getting the correct information from the water temperature, the air temperature, and some switches in here which are an on idle and off idle enrichment. Again, I don't think it's an idle. I mean, it idles fine. It works. It's only the start. So if it's only the start that's a problem, let's apply some logic here. There is a start enrichment sequence that is exclusive of this cold start. The start enrichment sequence has a voltage that's sent to the ECU, again, only during the key cranked on position. If you want to look at your factory service manual, it's actually pin number 4 of the 35-pin multi-connector that goes on the ECU. And I did test to make sure that in the key on position, I was getting the correct voltage at pin 4, which means I'm telling the ECU, hey, I'm starting, so add extra enrichment. That's what it's supposed to do. It always is a fixed extra enrichment amount. It just happens. So I believe it just happens. I wonder if it could be looking at the signal from the thermotime, or from the water temperature sending unit to decide whether or not it adds the enrichment or not. I don't know. But the factory service manual, I don't know if it's that real clear on that. I could go back and reread that. But my guess is that the start sequence signal to the ECU, I want to see if it impacts these injectors. What I'll do is I'll put a scope on the injectors. I'll look at the pulse width there during startup, and right after startup, immediately after startup, before the engine warms up at all, at idle. And you should see a definite spike in the pulse width between the start, while the key is cranking over, and once the engine starts, release go to on, and it's idling. That pulse should change if I'm interpreting right, if the start signal to the ECU is telling it to increase pulse width during the starting sequence. Anyway, that's the logic behind it. I know this is kind of rambling, so if you techno nerds are interested in what I'm saying or have any comments, that's why I'm putting this kind of videos out there for people to listen to. I mean, I'm not a genius on this stuff. I'm just getting into it, trying to read and understand. So if anybody else has a better idea or tell me I'm all wet, that's fine. I don't care. I'm just trying to learn and relay what I find. But anyway, tomorrow morning we're going to test this. I got to let everything cool off. It'll start right up right now. I'm positive it'll start. It always does after it's been started once in a day. But tomorrow morning will be the test. And I'll let you know how that goes. More later.